Once the largest human-made object in space, Mir's Russian space station crashed on Earth 21 years ago, ending 15 years of triumph and near tragedy. Welcome to Cosmos Observer, where nothing goes unobserved in the universe. There were only 24 minutes of oxygen left in the space station Mir. As precious air hissed from a hole in the hull, Michael Foale's ears were popping from the pressure loss. He sat alone in Mir's escape pod, a Soyuz space capsule, awaiting the arrival of his fellow crewmates, 2 Russian cosmonauts. When an uncrewed resupply vehicle collided with one of the link nodes that created Mir, they were urgently trying to identify and seal the puncture wound inflicted moments before. Foale remembered what he'd been told during his training as he waited in the dark. Perilous Soyuz. If you have less than 30 minutes of oxygen left, it's time to abandon ship. Minutes passed by. The crew members were still nowhere to be found. Despite Foale's hearing them shouting in Russian, it was evident, he says now, that these 2 weren't going anywhere. Mir was an 11-year-old decaying spaceship at the time, having already outlived its anticipated lifespan by more than 5 years. The station's Russian architects would use everything except bubblegum to keep it in orbit for 4 years. Finally, on March 23, 2001, they persuaded their beloved craft to plunge into Earth's atmosphere when it exploded above the South Pacific Ocean in a tremendous explosion. Mir began during the gloomy days of the Soviet Union following America's moon landings. The Soviets redirected their attention to developing space stations to save face. They wanted to take up permanent residence on Earth's high ground where they could conduct long-term microgravity experiments and, more importantly for the Soviet military, survey the planet's surface. The Soviets launched Salyut-1, a crewed space station 8 months before America's final moonwalk in 1972. Mir became the first modular space station 14 years later, with 6 additional components added by subsequent trips. NASA in the United States yearned for its space station. The space agency's only hope was to find a partner to help pay for it, because the space shuttle program consumed most of its funding. The Soviet Union would be that partner. Unfortunately, the Soviets were having financial difficulties funding their space program. When Russia's economy failed in 1989, the Mir crew questioned if someone would remember to bring them back to Earth for a short time. Overall, the US invested $1.5 billion in the Russian endeavor, raising questions about how much money the Americans saved by teaming up with their old foes. In 1995 and 1996, America's first 3 Mir visitors, Norman Thagard, Shannon Lucid, and John Blaha, had relatively uneventful trips. When physician Jerry Leninger flew to Mir in January 1997 on the space shuttle, he probably expected something similar, but less than a month later, he came perilously near to being America's first space casualty. Mirrors and smoke. As we enter the long, low structure behind Tommy Bartlett's Exploratory, a hands-on children's museum and tourist magnet in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, a flock of 8-year-olds flutters around us. As our eyes adjust to the darkness, Mir's enormous, strangely incongruous presence lying on its side, its long body disappearing into the horizon, strikes us. This isn't a dummy. It's a real Mir central node, one of 3 Soviet-built base station units. The other survivor is being held in a warehouse in Russia. Its journey to Wisconsin began when a representative from a Russian dealer offered to sell a rare car to the Exploratory's late owner, Tommy Bartlett. Mir was once the world's largest manufactured object in space. The central node is roughly the size of a school bus, with a porthole opening to a chamber with 5 ports, each going to a different module. A guitar launch with Mir to give homegrown onboard entertainment is hung on one wall. Mir's oxygen generators, which looked like a pair of scuba tanks and burnt lithium perchlorate cartridges to make oxygen, were hanging nearby. That's right, you've been burned in a cramped, congested space. In space, there's no such thing as a vacuum. What could go wrong? Leninger and his comrades found out on February 23, 1997, one of the generator canisters caught fire, flooding Mir with toxic fumes. The crew members fought to put on gas masks that didn't work since they couldn't see their hands in front of their faces. When they tried to remove the fire extinguishers from the walls, they discovered that they were strapped so tightly in place that they were practically immovable. According to Russian reports, the fire lasted 90 seconds. Gathain said it lasted 14 minutes in all. In addition, Russia claims that the cosmonauts extinguished the fire. It just went out on its own. Leninger, a Navy-trained medic, treated the burns of his comrades. He reported the incident to NASA and was disappointed to hear the American Space Agency essentially repeat the Russian storyline. This incident was no huge issue in NASA's eyes, and it was fantastic training for the ISS, Gathain explains. The Russians never informed them that there had been previous fires. Minutes away from dying, The suit from the fire was still on Mir's walls when astrophysicist Michael Full swapped positions with Leninger on May 17, 1997. "It's been like being on the space station for me," he jokes. Despite the recent fire, Full had no reservations about staying on Mir for more than 4 months. "I thought it was weird at first, but it was resolved," he says. "I figured it would never happen again." The silence was broken a month after Full arrived on Mir. For years, a series of unscrewed cargo spacecraft known as Progress had delivered supplies to Mir, and the difficult docking procedure had always been done using Ukrainian government technology. But unable to pay the Ukrainians, the cash-strapped Russians opted to try a manual docking operation. There would be no telemetry, only cosmonaut Vasily Tsiblev staring at a television screen and controlling 2 joysticks. During a test docking, Full was deployed to a window inspector, the Mir node that doubled as his lodgings and science lab. His task was to use a laser rangefinder to determine the speed of the approaching Progress. Progress was crushing Mir at an alarming rate. Progress had ripped a solar panel array apart and collided with Spectre. Sirens wailed, alerting to a severe reduction in air pressure. Following the book's instructions, Full entered the Soyuz capsule to await the arrival of the other crew members so they could make a run for Earth. Full returned to Mir after they failed to appear. He discovered cosmonaut Alexander Lazutkin tangled in a tangle of electrical lines, attempting to seal off the damaged Spectre and stem the air leak. On the other hand, those cables brought power from Spectre's solar array, erected to complement Mir's poor solar panels. Mir's lifeblood was being sucked out with each break. The last cable was finally disconnected. Only one step remained: sealing the access to Spectre with a specially made cap to prevent any more valuable air from seeping into the leaking Spectre. With only 7 minutes of oxygen left, the leak was stopped. Spectre's solar panels had been disconnected, and the remaining panels had shifted out of position so they weren't getting enough sunshine, Full explains. Mir's gyroscopes shut down when it lost power, causing the station to spin. Whenever Mir's solar panels were pointing in the wrong direction, it was a distressingly often occurrence. The gyros wouldn't resume because the most efficient solar panels were out of commission, and Mir couldn't be stabilized until the old panels were aligned. Mir was spinning at 1 revolution every 3 minutes, so Full advised using the Soyuz engines for a few rapid bursts to slow it down. Mir was ultimately brought to relative stability after a few false starts, when misfire sped up the spinning. As Mir sailed over Russia after 24 hours, operators in Moscow were finally able to send new commands to Mir's positioning rockets and steady the vehicle. The end. Mir's space voyage came to a catastrophic end in 2001. Following many failed attempts to find new owners for Mir, including one group interested in utilizing it as an orbiting TV studio, Russia accepted the inevitable. On March 23rd, the station shattered into molten shards, guitar and all, and crashed back to Earth. Mir's legacy, on the other hand, goes on. The ISS is extremely similar to Mir, adds Full, the only person to have flown on both. "We can criticize the Russian space program as much as we want," Full argues. However, a Russian would argue, "Hey, you lost the space shuttle 15 years ago, and we've maintained the International Space Station running ever since, and there's no disputing that."